All right, good evening. It's Tuesday night, which means I'm having a catch. Tonight, my guest is JC, the curator of A Brief History of Baseball on Tick Tock. Welcome, JC.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be a lot of fun. Now, I want to briefly, before I ask JC about his origins on TikTok, I want to tell you that about 6 months ago, a friend of mine, Andy, who might be watching this right now, he sent me a text. He said, "Are you on TikTok? You got to check this out." And I watched it. I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's really cool." And then I think the next day I was looking for it again. It was gone. I was like, "Oh, I love this account. Where's this video? What's going on?" Tell me, and it was you, by the way. It was you.
Yeah.
Tell me how you got involved with TikTok. Now, I downloaded it out of pandemic boredom, and now I'm just like addicted to it. But what made you?
Same thing. It was one of those, everybody's got this app. I'm just going to lurk. I'm going to watch some videos. And when I initially started my account, I was really political. And so I would stitch people whose opinions I disagreed with and, start that whole rigmarole. But that gets tiresome. You get stressed out. And there was a guy who kept running weird facts. And so I would kind of piggyback onto his stuff. I would stitch. And eventually I started to touch on a couple of baseball stats. I think the first one I did was Joe Sewell, Hall of Famer, 8,333 plate appearances. He only struck out 114 times. And that got a ton of views. And so I did another couple of videos, and then you kind of just fall into a niche at that point. And so I was the baseball guy. But at the same time, I didn't really want to be a creator. And so I would do this thing where I would leave my videos up for about 36 to 72 hours. And then I would delete them, figuring, nobody's going to care. And there was such a level of complaint. And people like, "Why are you doing this? You got to leave them up. Like, we love these." And it started to become like mini events where people would start to follow me because they're like, "Oh, I don't want to miss a video." And so I went from having like 200 followers to all of a sudden I had like 13,000 followers. And I'm like, "Oh, this is kind of overwhelming." But I would still just delete the videos. And then somebody asked me, "How many viewers do you have to do to keep them up?" So I said 20K. And when I got to 18K, I was like, "You know what? Close enough. I'll start keeping them up." And so that's where I am now. I'm still not at 20K, but I'm not in it for the viewers. I'm in it just so the stories don't die, really. There's a lot of obscure baseball players that I'd like to keep their names in people's mouths.
Sure. Tell me about your process about how you decide what you're going to talk about on any particular day.
I don't really, like 9 times out of 10, it's kind of a spur of the moment thing. I subscribe to stathead.com, and then there's also Seamheads, which does the Negro League database. And what I'll do, what's great with Stathead is you can just type in random things. Like, for example, the last video I made was on Davey Lokes, because I happen to look up what's the most stolen bases anyone's had age 40 or after. And he's the only guy with 40 stolen bases. So I'm like, "Oh, it's kind of a neat fact." Boom, there's a video. Some of them are stories that I grew up hearing. My dad was a big baseball guy. He was a big card collector. We used to go to the shows all the time. So the stories that I've known since I was a kid that I was like, "Oh, let's see if anyone knows this one." But a lot of the times somebody will mention, "Hey, you should look this guy up," or I'll hear it on like a radio program or a podcast. And I'm like, "Ah, it's kind of interesting. Let's see what we got." Just kind of born from that.
Yeah. I need to figure out what I'm doing wrong in that app. Now I've been on there about a year and a half or so, and I think I got about 170 followers, but I think like 90 of them are fake accounts.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure there's a good percentage. The nice thing on TikTok is they give you your analytics.
Yeah.
And so at one point I forget how many viewers I had, but I was at like 92% male. And I was like, that pretty much tracks for my life in general. So I believe it. But now all of a sudden I'm at like 80%. And it's like, yeah, no. Like that's just a lot of bots. But yeah. I get paid either way. So
is there obviously like a lot of the videos that get like, I mean, we're talking about like millions and millions of views. They're either using a soundbite that's trending, or they're using the right type of like hashtag. Like maybe that's what I need to do, is just start taking headlines from the newspapers and say like, okay, hashtag Super Bowl, but
Yeah.
not
So
even mention the Super Bowl.
I think the only times I ever did hashtags is when I would talk music and I would like tag the bands or whatnot, or
Yeah.
I would do like an @ to the band. I got the most followers pretty much from stitching that one guy's videos. He would be like, "What's an interesting fact that seems fake
Yeah.
but is real?" And so I would just come up with that. One of the videos I did was on how President Tyler's grandkid is still alive. There's actually 2 of them, but one of them recently passed.
Okay.
But I mean, President Tyler was our 10th president, so the fact that his grandkid's still alive is like.
That's crazy.
But I got almost 500,000 views on that video alone, and so.
Yeah, I'm still trying to kind of find my voice. Obviously, I do utopian stuff. I'll post like, oh, hey, opening day's coming up, or here's some baseball cards. But then I'll do like fake ads for toilet paper.
Yeah.
You know, like, hey, toilet paper, I use it to clean up back there. How do you use it? And I thought that was going to get me into the, you know, the stratosphere. It got like 6 views or whatever.
Well, the real issue with the app is that if people stitch you or they duet you, you don't get any credit for that unless the person goes to the original video to see your video.
Sure.
I mean, not a huge deal for most people, but like if you're a creator trying to make money on the app and people are stealing your ideas, it's kind of disheartening. I personally don't. I mean, I make enough money from the Creator Fund where I can pay for my StatHead subscription, and so it all evens out to me.
Sure. Well, I think my, you know, number one, it just kind of the last thing I do before bed, like, oh, let's, you know, find some funny stuff here, just entertaining. But if I can build any type of awareness for the universe, I think I've gotten 6 people specifically from TikTok where it'll be a baseball account. I'll just slide into their comments and say, hey, if you're on Facebook, I got a cool idea. So there's probably 6 people watching tonight that I only know from TikTok. And I guess technically you're one of them, because
Nice.
I think I reached out to you shortly after Andy sent me, because what happened was he sent me a TikTok. And when I went to watch it, it didn't load. It was like, I said, it's gone or it's not attached. And I think it's because, like you said, you deleted them after a couple of days. And he must not have sent it immediately after you uploaded it. So like the next day he said, okay, there's a new one up, or whenever it was next week. He said, but watch it because I think they're gone after a day or whatever. And I think I reached out to you almost immediately. And I said, hey, I got this idea. It's kind of a fictional universe, alternate reality. Love to have you in. And then as I started to see more videos, I'm like, I got to get this guy on the show. Like, this is just a wealth of knowledge.
I got to be honest. I have had, you know, probably close to 40 different people ask me to do podcasts or whatnot. And I never really had the time, but I really like what you do. So you're actually the only one I've ever done, probably the only one I plan on doing. But I like the idea. I mean, I think as any kid from our age, you know, we probably had Stratomatic baseball, and
sure,
you know, you take all the cards and shuffle them up and build super teams, and that's effectively what you've done. So I really like watching the headlines pop up too. So
yeah, that's my favorite part. And you know, if people may not realize this, is that I'm not creating the storylines. I'm not writing. It's not a creative writing process where I'm going to say, oh, this guy's going to throw a no-hitter Friday, or this team's going to win it all. I literally, like, the universe itself will give me a date, and then I'll look at that date's history. And if there's, you know, I got 16 games a day. So if there's 12 on that day, I'll use the next day and I'll just shuffle them. And, you know, like if the number 7 pops up, I take the 7th game from that day and I copy it into my spreadsheet. And then I go, oh, hey, the Mets won. And then, okay, well, who homered? The catcher. All right, my catcher today is Piazza. So that's how we create the winners and losers. So I'm actually finding out results maybe an hour before you do.
Nice.
Sometimes if I have a busy day planned, I'll do it like at midnight. I'll you know, like if it's a Friday night and I need to create Saturday, I'll do it Friday night. I'll schedule a post for Saturday. So it's like I'm really not doing anything Saturday, but you think I am because you see this post at 6:00 that says, hey, did you see that game on NBC today? Scully and Garagiola were at Miller Park, and Teddy Aguirre struck out Ted Williams.
Teddy.
You know, that's kind of how we do it. But for me, it's like, remember those Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Oh, absolutely.
When we were kids. It's kind of how it feels. It's like you start with a clean slate, and then all of a sudden you get 3 or 4 months into this, and it's like, hey, the Brewers got a chance here, or the Mets are doing well. So
if I remember to send it to you, there's actually a guy who took all those Choose Your Own Adventure books and he graphed out all the different nodes, all the different paths you could take, and then turned it into artwork, and they're spectacular.
That's awesome. So I got to ask you, you're an East Coast guy.
Yep.
But you are a avid Brewers fan.
Yes.
How did that happen?
So my family's from Astoria, Queens. I ended up going to high school out in a place in Nassau County called East Meadow, which is the home of Frank Viola.
Nice.
But so when I was a kid, when we were kids, the Brewers were the American League team, and the Mets were in the National League team. You know, that was my National League team. And one of the reasons I hate interleague play is, and we've talked about this before, is that I like the idea of the All-Star game for most people being the first time they're getting to see guys from the other league. So growing up in New York, you had the benefit, you know, I could head right over to Shea Stadium. I could take the train into Yankee Stadium. And, you know, that's how I saw the Brewers live growing up, you know, through the Yankees. I'm a bigger guy, but I could never hit for power when I would play with my buddies. I always liked the idea of just dropping little Texas leaguers in there and getting on base. And just watching Paul Molitor as a kid, like, here's this guy, he can spray the ball all over the field, pop one out every once in a while, but he was just a fast guy. And I liked third base. And so he was my guy. And then eventually, when the Brewers moved to the National League, I had to make a choice. And the Wilpons weren't exactly the most savory owners in baseball. Like, they weren't the best for the ball club. Yeah. And so I ended up choosing Milwaukee and staying there. I still have a place in my heart for the Mets. They're, you know, I like to see them do good, but I just like that. I like the role of the underdog, and I don't know that there's more of an underdog in baseball than Milwaukee. So,
I mean, it is, I guess, technically the smallest market if you talk about like. The size of the metropolis, and
my understanding is half that state roots for Chicago. So,
I mean, I don't know. Like, it's weird. Have you ever been to a game here in Milwaukee?
No, I've never set foot in Wisconsin.
Okay, Wisconsin you can take or leave Wisconsin, but Miller Park's, or whatever they're calling it now, is a really nice park. If you're ever out here, I'd love to host you for a game. But when the Cubs come, it's really hard to get into Wrigley Field. It's always a sellout. If you're not a season ticket holder, you're going to get scalped pretty bad. So Miller Park, I think the capacity is 46,000. So when the Cubs come for a series, it literally is half Cubs fans.
Yeah.
And they call it, Wrigley North.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic park. It's the best bratwurst you'll ever have is at the game at Miller Park. What was the year like? Do you have any memories of the 82 series, or was that like I was 7?
Yeah, I was almost 5, so no, not really.
Okay. So I'm guessing your earliest memories that have kind of hung on, maybe the 87 team?
For the Brewers?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely Team Streak is there. I knew I have some memories before then, but nothing that really sticks out. You mentioned Teddy Aguirre earlier. Like that's a guy that I loved when I was a kid.
Yeah.
My earliest baseball memory is actually buying a pack of Topps cards off the ice cream man. Used to get them for like $1 a pack, and just cracking open the pack, the 83 Topps, the little circle picture, and Pete Rose from the Phillies right on the top, and just being like, oh my God, I thought I won the lottery.
I want to see.
Rose, it's great. Like,
actually,
all the way back to my house.
I have my cards here. I'm going to see if I have that card. 83 Topps, huh?
Yeah.
Well, all right. I don't have the exact card, but I have this. Let me see if you remember these. Kmart put out like a set in the year he got his record-breaking hit, and it had all of his cards, like 4 to a card. And this one, I think, has the 83.
Yeah, didn't they do that in the 86 top set too? They have all
Yeah.
the POs. Yeah.
Yep. And then, so actually, the card I just showed you is from Topps, but then these are the Kmart cards.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I remember those.
Yeah, I still have these, and like, I never collected cards to like make money off of it. I mean, the industry told me when I was a kid that, oh, you're going to put your kids through college with your Conseco rookies.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
You have a stack of Greg Jeffries rookies this thick.
Oh my God. And Todd Van Poppel and
Kevin Moss.
Yeah, like my binder is more like the favorites and stuff. Like Topps is doing like these Topps Heritage cards where they're taking like Jackie Robinson and putting him on an 87 Topps logo or border, if you will. So
yeah, I don't have a huge card collection. I only collect miscut rookies, and even then, it's mostly like I try to get all the Hall of Famers from like the, say 1970 to 1990. Like that's those are the guys that I got to watch as a kid. So, but then I got guys that I just liked.
Sure,
like Jesse Orozco. Like, no,
he
has
actually
the record for most games as a pitcher, but he's never going to see the inside of Cooperstown unless he buys a ticket. So
yeah. I mean, Orozco, obviously, I love Orozco. He was the closer for the 86 Mets. He was actually a Brewer for, I think, a year or two. Have you ever seen these, by the way? And by the way, you'll probably end up with these at some point because my daughter doesn't really care about this kind of stuff. These were the cards that we got from, you said you got cards from the Ice Cream Man.
Yeah.
I just want to go on record. If my Ice Cream Man from the 80s is watching this, you didn't have baseball cards. So I've got a bone to pick with you.
We used to buy baseball cards, and then we would buy WWF cards.
Are you a wrestling fan?
Not in the longest time. My favorite wrestler of all time was Tito Santana.
Oh.
That's about the last time I watched wrestling.
Well, all right. So we're going to have to schedule a second show just to talk. Because my previous guest, he's a huge wrestling fan, and we could have talked wrestling for like an hour alone. But I remember, so obviously if Santana's a favorite of yours, you remember how Savage beat him, right?
Yeah.
The Danny Davis, that was the start of the Danny Davis storyline. They didn't know it was a storyline until a couple months later. Like, let's just keep this going.
So I don't remember what the name of the event was, but over at Nassau Coliseum, home of the Islanders, or won't be shortly, but they had a wrestling event. I got to high five Junkyard Dog, but the whole idea was one of those you got to throw the guy out over the top rope deals.
Like a battle royal, or
yeah, it was like a battle royale, barnyard rumble,
bunkhouse sprawl, or something like that.
But so they had, it was like Hacksaw Jim Duggan, it was like Hillbilly Jim, all those guys, and they had Dino Bravo was wearing a Canadians jersey, and he basically knocked everyone out, and he was like the winner, and everyone's booing because it's the home of the Islanders.
Sure.
And Hacksaw Jim Duggan had gotten knocked out, but he had gotten knocked out through the ropes. He wasn't eliminated. And he came running back in wearing a Mike Bossy jersey with a hockey stick and just cross-checks Dino Bravo over the top rope. To this day, that is the loudest environment I have ever been in. And it's not even close.
I always loved, as a kid, I went to a house show. It must have been 93 because, it's the way they light it. They're not recording for television. It was pretty empty that night, but it was right after Molitor left for Toronto. And one of the heels on the card was named the Mountie, Jacques Rougeau, obviously a bad guy. He had Jimmy Hart as his manager. And back then, and maybe they still do this today. I haven't been to a wrestling show in 15 years. To incite the crowd, in between matches, they would say something that is specific to that local crowd. And the Mountie came out, and to generate heat, he was like, "What about that Paul Molitor going to the Blue Jays?"
Nice.
But I wanted to show this to you. These were the cards that the police officers used to hand out. They'd have like 2 a week.
Oh, nice.
And very simple design, you know, just a white border, black outline. But these are the cards that I'm using to create this year's Utopian cards. I just wanted a basic, you know, something that didn't require me to change all these gradient colors and fonts and all that. So these will be yours at some point. I showed these to my daughter recently, and she's like, you know, great. You know, she was way more into this when she was like 5, but she turns 18 next year, and you know, she's like, you don't care about a Dan Plesac, Gracie? And she's like, nah. So we'll save these for you. Another thing I want to talk about, and again, this could be a topic that could be its own like panel show. Let's talk about players that are not in the Hall of Fame that we feel maybe should be. And we could even talk about players that are in the Hall of Fame that maybe...
There's certainly some arguments to be made to remove certain guys, but if you're in, you're in. If somebody thought to put you in, I'm not going to...
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to campaign against Harold Baines.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at Rabbit Marinville's numbers and be like, how the fuck did this happen? But he's in. No, so I mean, my list of guys who should be in is lengthy. I mean, you go back in time, you got guys like Cupid Childs, you know, Bill Dolan, the shortstop. Like, that guy's got a fucking 75 WAR. How is he not in? Like, Bob Carruthers, the pitcher. I mean, he's one of 2 ball players in history with over 200 wins and fewer than 100 losses. And there was almost a third. It was Pedro, and then he came back to play for the fucking Phillies and got that 100th loss. Like, what did you have left to prove, Pedro? But I mean, more recent guys. I mean, obviously you got your Hernandez, you know, your Don Mattingly, you know, Dale Murphy's got an argument. Dan Quisenberry is a guy I believe 100% should be in. So does Bill James. Bill James is kind of dumbfounded that he's not in. My argument for Quisenberry is simple. He retired 6th all-time in saves, and he's got, of any pitcher who debuted in the 1900s and on, he's got like the 2nd or 3rd lowest walks per 9 innings. Like, that's what I want from my pitcher. It's great. Like, but in terms of guys that are like currently on the ballot, you know, obviously you had all the steroid guys should be in, but Bobby Abreu is a guy that I feel most people should take a second look at. If I'm being honest, Bobby Abreu was better than Ichiro at the plate. I mean, obviously Ichiro's a much better fielder.
Yeah.
But in terms of at the plate, Abreu reached first base more times than Ichiro, more times than Tony Gwynn, and he did it in fewer games and fewer plate appearances than both of those guys. You're talking about he's got like 100 RBI seasons, scored 100 runs 4 times, 9-time 2020 guy. Like, it's a travesty that he had to play in the steroid era, you know, and everyone's looking at these gaudy fucking numbers. And meanwhile, you have the Moneyball version of Tony Gwynn playing, and he's not going to get in. So, I mean, that one hurts. Carlos Delgado not going in. That one doesn't make sense to me either. Albert Bell not being in. Albert Bell, when he retired, was only the 4th player in baseball history, I believe the 4th, with 9 consecutive 100 RBI seasons. That number's like 10 now because of the steroid era.
Yeah.
I mean, 4. But because he was kind of an asshole, and it's the baseball writers who are putting guys in,
yeah,
he's not going to see the inside of Cooperstown.
What do you think of the process? Like, I've never understood why we're putting all this power with the writers. Like, I mean, it's a fans game. I'm not saying the fans should get 100% of the vote, but I think they should have some say. I also think Hall of Famers should have some say. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's pros and cons to all of that. You give the vote to some of the Hall of Famers, and that's how you end up with guys like Freddie Lindstrom in. You know, because that's essentially what the Veterans Committee is they start bringing in their buddies.
Yeah.
Like, all the people who are saying Dave Concepcion should be in. Brilliant ball player, not a Hall of Famer. I wouldn't even have put Tony Perez in, if I'm being entirely honest. But you can't have everyone making on a team. Like, where do you got to draw the line somewhere. The problem with giving it to the writers is humans hold grudges. You know, there's always going to be guys. I mean, the fact you look at a guy like Tom Seaver went in without 100% of the vote. Like, and that's because the system is flawed. You're only allowed to vote for X number of guys. So you're handed a ballot with 20 names on it. You can only vote for 10. But if there are 15 legitimate Hall of Famers, somebody's getting left out.
Yeah.
And I know people have the argument all the time, like, oh, this guy's a first ballot Hall of Famer. This guy should have to wait. Like, that shit is nonsense. You're either a Hall of Famer or you weren't a Hall of Famer.
I'm glad you said that, because that has always been my take on it, is this idea that, okay, his first year on the ballot, he got 38% of the vote, and then he gets 40, and then he gets 45. Like, I don't understand. Like, every single player, it doesn't matter from what era. I either think you say he's a Hall of Famer or he's not a Hall of Famer. So
I had conversations with people when Ortiz just got put in who were like, yeah, he's a Hall of Famer, but he shouldn't have went in first ballot. It's like, the guy's got 500 fucking home runs. Like, what? How is that not a first ballot? Like, and that's the thing. Like, we used to have these milestones, like 500 home runs, 3,000 hits, 300 wins, and you were like automatic. Like, that just got you in. And now all of a sudden we're at this period where it's like, well, I don't know that I ought to put him in right away. And they want to talk about, well, he failed the test in 2003. We don't know what he took. He very well could have been, popping roids. But they definitely tested him from 2004 on. And you look at his body of work from 2004 on, and you look at that guy, and you tell me that's not a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah, they got to figure out a better way. Like, the whole 5-year thing, which I know that they'll waive for, Puckett. I think they waived it for that. Did they waive it for Halladay or?
I don't know. We could do a whole episode on my opinion of Roy Halladay being in the Hall of Fame.
Well, let's just answer that right now. Is he a Hall of Famer?
No.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I just ruffled a bunch of feathers there. Roy Halladay is in the Hall of Fame because he was a bad pilot. That's it.
I mean,
if you look at his numbers, he is Brett Saberhagen. And I love Brett Saberhagen, but I'm not putting him in the Hall of Fame. But now that Roy Halladay's in, now I want to see Brett Saberhagen in the Hall of Fame. You look at a guy like Dwight Gooden, who's considered like a failure. But if you actually look at his numbers, he's Roy Halladay. So, like, what's the disconnect?
Yeah. There's obviously, the reasons why some of these guys aren't in is obviously you get the steroid era. Keith Hernandez, he testified in 84, 85 in the cocaine trials. That's why he's not in. We're talking about the greatest defensive first baseman of all time.
What bothers me with that argument is that Molitor was also one of the guys who did coke. And, like, he's in. And, like, but they'll point to his 3,000 hits. And I say this as a guy for whom Molitor is my favorite player all time. He's the most underrated ball player ever. Keith Hernandez, though, you're talking a 296 career hitter. You're talking an MVP, captain of a World Series team, won another World Series with the Cardinals, like 11 consecutive Gold Gloves. He's got the highest TZR of any first baseman, the highest DRS of any first baseman. How are you not putting that guy in? Yeah. And it all comes down to nobody gives a fuck about defense. I was put into a position of defending Bill Mazeroski the other day. And I was like, listen, you're looking at Bill Mazeroski's stats. He has a 260 career hitter, but he also hit like 323 in the postseason with an over 900 OPS. It's like, the dude was clutch. And he's also got a fucking vacuum for a glove. He's the all-time total zone run guy for second base. You got to put that guy in. That's like, Hernandez should be in. Mattingly goes in for his bat, in my opinion. And I know he's got 9 Gold Gloves, but I always said if he and Keith played in the same league, Mattingly never sniffs a Gold Glove.
Yeah.
Like, those two guys aren't close to the same defensive prowess.
I mean, there are some members of the Hall of Fame that are in, I think, because of their glove. Like Ozzie Smith obviously had no bat.
Yeah.
He's in. Brooks Robinson, I think of as more of a defensive player. But
yeah, I mean, he had a little pop, but
yeah. So one of the things I'm going to ask you too, because I am totally ignorant when it comes to some of these newer stats, because when I grew up, I was all about homers, RBIs, batting average, the back of the baseball card kind of stuff.
Traditional, the slash, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us, because I know there's going to be people watching this tonight. They're not familiar with some of the things they might be hearing, the TZR. Can you explain? So let's just say, we'll call it a disaster recovery situation where you and I have to explain baseball to the next generation because everything's been wiped from history. So like they're relying on you and I to explain everything. And we've been asked to make sense of war because I admittedly don't understand. Like I get the concept of it,
So
but how do they calculate? How do they?
It's an imperfect formula because depending on what site you go to, they have a different formula.
Okay.
And depending on what position a guy plays, that formula is weighted a little differently. So you can go into like Baseball Reference, a stat head, and you can see a guy's offensive WAR and his defensive WAR, and you would think I can just combine these two, and that should be his overall WAR. The problem is both of those numbers are weighted by his positions. You're effectively, if you're just combining them, you're weighting them twice. But the idea with WAR is that they're trying to get almost like a neutral site player stripped down. Like, what is the value of this player? My issue with it is that it doesn't take into account things like runs and RBIs. And the argument that, behind the formula is like those are team-dependent stats. If you're on a team where guys are getting on base in front of you all the time, you have more RBI opportunities. And there's some truth to that. But at the same time, like, I want to know what those guys are doing in those RBI opportunities. So, effectively, WAR is just, it's almost like the hitter's version of field-independent pitching. They're just, how good is this guy in a vacuum by himself, compared to if I brought in just what I call like the quadruple A player. Like you're pulling a guy out of the minors, he's Joe average at everything. How much better or worse is this guy? I hated it when it first came out. I'm very much a traditional numbers guy. But as you start to look at where guys fall in the line on WAR, you realize like this is probably about where I would rank them too. So this kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm not 100% sold on the stat, but it's certainly a valuable addition to judging a player. The downside to it is longevity is a benefit. And I guess if you're like the owner of a franchise, that's a valuable thing to know. But like one of the things they do with WAR and then the other stat is JAWS. JAWS basically takes like your 7 best seasons and figures out where you rank. The problem with those numbers is you end up with shit like Sandy Koufax being ranked the 90th greatest pitcher. Like there's not 89 guys who are better than Sandy Koufax.
Correct.
Like there's not even close.
There's a gentleman within this group. His name is Mark Weber. He runs something similar to the Utopian Baseball Universe. It's called Eternal Baseball. And what they do is they take the 3 best consecutive seasons of any particular player, and that's how they kind of measure what they're going to do within Eternal Baseball. So we were talking about Mattingly earlier. From like 85 to 87, that was like the face of baseball. Like he was winning.
Oh, yeah.
He was either winning or in the run for MVPs, batting titles.
Yeah, he was swinging at beach balls, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Now, let me ask you this as kind of a follow-up. What would be like, all right, Mike Trout is arguably the greatest player in the league right now. What would be like, because again, growing up, if a guy hit 330, like, you think of 330, 340, you think of Boggs and Gwynn and guys like that. 30 back then, 30 homers was a big deal.
Oh, absolutely.
I remember the year Cecil Fielder hit 51. It was like, what? Because it hadn't been done since George Foster.
Since Foster, yeah.
So what is a WAR where if you say, all right, he's a 10 WAR, that's a phenomenal season? Like, what's the number?
So anything above 2, you're considered a starter. Anything like 4, 5, 6, you're considered like an all-star. Anything above that, like you're just an elite level guy.
So
these
like,
guys, when they put up seasons of like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, like they are having historic years. And that's kind of the area where I looked at where WAR started to make sense, where it was like, all right, I get that you're not calculating RBIs and runs, but like, you know, you look at 1972, Steve Carlton. Are you familiar with that year? So he goes 27-10 for a Phillies team that only wins 59 games.
Yeah.
And his WAR is almost 13. That makes sense. Like I look at that and I'm like, all right, like he's almost won 50% of his team's ball games. Like you're telling me he alone is valuable for like 13 of those by himself. That checks.
Yeah.
Like,
so I want to get your opinion on a formula. I don't think I created it. I mean, there's so many of these formulas out there. But you were talking about like team dependent stats, but the way I've always measured a player, at least in the last, 15, 20 years with all these new stats coming out, is for hitters specifically. I take their plate appearances. I divide them by the number of, I'll basically add up the RBIs and the runs they scored, subtract the homers. Because if a guy hits a solo homer, he's not producing 2 runs.
Yeah.
And then coming up with like a percentage of that, and then kind of using that as a barometer, if you will. So like when people will say like, okay, who are you choosing of these 5 players? That's the first thing I do is I look at the RBIs and runs. I add those up, take away the homers, how many plate appearances, whoever has the best percentage is the guy I'd take. But what is the flaw in that? Because like you said, if you got a guy like Ricky Henderson hitting in front of you,
so
that
I mean,
naturally going to be higher.
The obvious flaw is, if you have guys mashing behind you,
yeah,
like you're going to score a ton of runs. Like if you're Jimmy Rollins and you have, Howard and Utley, pushing 600 home runs out the park behind you,
sure.
like you're going to score a lot. Obviously, I mean, your formula is just offensive. I mean, you're not.
I haven't really come up with a good, and I was a pitcher, but I haven't really come up with a good. I actually like of the newer pitching ones. I love WHIP. Wins, record means nothing because if you're like Jacob DeGrom,
wins is a team stat, absolutely.
Yeah, Jacob DeGrom won a Cy Young, and I think he was like 11-9 or something.
Yeah,
and then
you look at a case. Was it 1990? Bob Welch, wins the 27 games, gets the Cy Young over Clemens. Clemens' ERA is like a full point lower.
Yeah,
like that's not even close to the same guy.
Yeah, and Welch's like strikeout to walk ratio was nowhere near. It's interesting. Like, but WHIP I trust.
I like WHIP. I mean, ERA is great. Adjusted ERA. Field independent pitching is always good.
Yeah.
And again, you got guys who benefit from having Ozzie Smith sitting behind them. Those are pretty much the big ones for me. Adjusted ERA is really good. And again, you look at a guy, and all of these have to obviously have prerequisite modifiers. Like you can't just look at a guy who pitched like 10 innings and be like, look how good he is. But you look at somebody like Mariano Rivera, and who we all know was great anyway. But have you ever looked at his adjusted ERA? He's like 40 points ahead of the next guy. It's not even it's like you created a video game character, maxed out their stats, and then just like, this is what this guy did. And that's one of the things, and I hate the Yankees. I always make the joke that when the Yankees and Cardinals play one another, I root for a terrorist attack. I hate the Yankees, but there comes a point where like you have to look at some of these guys they've had and just realize like that might have been one of the best players I've ever seen. And that's the case with Rivera. And there's a lot of like old heads who just don't like relief pitches. They don't like where the game's gone. They want guys to pitch complete games. And, they're obviously ignoring the entire business side of baseball. Like these guys are $1 million investments. But even from just a strategy point, like we know now, like the third time through a lineup, you're likely to fall. Like that's why you bring in a fresh arm guy they haven't seen. You bring in a Josh Hader type guy. As far as relief pitchers go, I mean, I think Mariano Rivera might be so far ahead of the next guy compared to any other position in baseball. Like I can't think of a guy who's that much better than his contemporaries at his position than Mo was.
And
it's comical.
And correct me if I'm wrong, he was the first 100% Hall of Famer, right?
Yeah. I mean, he shouldn't have been, but yeah, he was.
Yeah.
which is kind of shocking. It's amazing that there wasn't some like Boston beat writer who was like, you know what, fucking Yankees.
I think my biggest pet peeve with the current game is like, I always talk about the Blake Snell game in the World Series, how I think he was working on a shutout. I think he went 4 1/3. They pulled him because it was, third time around or whatever. But like, I kind of miss the old days. Like, we just streamed the Game 7 of 91. If that game's played today, does Morris even last 6?
No. And you know what? I mean, as a Mets fan, you're familiar with this game. It's Johan Santana's no-hitter. When he pitched a no-hitter and they stressed out his arm and he was never quite the same.
Yeah.
I think everyone in the league looked at that and went, maybe that's not the best thing we should be doing.
Sure.
He had a Hall of Fame trajectory, and then the wheels fell off.
Yeah. I feel like there's got to be a happy medium. Like, again, we're not talking about like a late season game. We're talking about like Game 5 of the World Series. And 4 1/3, like, it just.
I mean, you'd like to leave it all on the field. You'd like that opportunity, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying that was the right call. I'm just saying I believe that was, that they start to manage beyond that season, and that's
it. But it's weird. It's almost as if like the agents are managing.
Yeah,
doesn't it almost feel like
it's the money? It's absolutely the money.
What's that?
It's the money is dictating the game.
Sure.
You're going to get the fans in the seats regardless for certain ball clubs. And so they don't care. They're turning a profit. If we win, cool. If we don't, cool. And so, you look at a guy like a Blake Snell, like, all right, this guy could put asses in the seats for years. Do we want to jeopardize ruining his arm just to get a championship that everyone's going to forget about 15 years from now?
Sure. But again, like, I want to find a medium because, like, he wasn't at 130 like Johan was. He was at like 81 pitches.
Yeah. I mean, they might have been trying to save him for a possible Game 7 relief pitcher scenario. Yeah. I have no idea. But
I don't know. But if you are watching in the Utopian, because it always comes back to that, you're not going to see. I mean, you are going to see starters go 4 1/3, but it's not going to be. It's because they gave up 8 runs. Most of the box scores we're pulling from the past are well before 2019, 2021.
I actually have like the flip take too. Like, you'll see managers pull guys who get rocked. They give up 8 runs in 2 1/3. Just fucking leave that guy in. You're not coming.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Work out.
We actually, and you'll find this interesting being a Brewers fan. One of the box scores we pulled from history was a Brewers game where Mike Caldwell gave up like 14 runs, and I'm like, how is that possible? And I kind of researched it, and I think the manager at the time was Bamberger. He's like, I wanted to save my bullpen. Like, why take him out at that point?
That's how you end up with like Fernando Tatis hitting 2 grand slams in the same inning off the same pitcher. You just at some point the game's out of hand. Just leave the guy in. Why are you going to ruin another arm?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're going to come back to baseball shortly here, but I noticed you got a guitar behind you.
I do.
You play?
I do. I play guitar, banjo. I'm trying to learn the drums, but I don't have the syncopation or the coordination for it. So.
By the way, I'm a fantastic air drummer. My dad was a drummer.
My steering wheel.
Yeah, steering wheel. And I got, like, if you actually put the instrument in my hand, it's like a language I haven't learned yet. But air drumming, air guitar, I can do all that. But you and I had a conversation a while back, and I want to kind of piggyback on that. I made a comment about math rock.
Yes.
Now, I want to share a brief story here. We were talking about Billy Joel earlier. I went into a record store in 2005. It was about a mile from the campus I used to work at in Milwaukee. And Billy Joel just put out a box set called My Lives. And I had been looking forward to it for a long time. This was before like Amazon Prime was a thing. And I went in this record store and I said, hey, do you guys have the new Billy Joel box set? And the guy behind the counter was such a dick. He was like, yeah, maybe check Target or Kmart. And I was like, that was the last time I had actually ever gone into that store because I was so upset. I used to spend ridiculous amounts of money there and making fun of me for like asking for that. But on that exact same day, I shared that story with one of the tellers at the credit union I worked at. And I said, "Do you like Billy Joel?" And she said, my parents said I'm more of a math rock person. What exactly is math rock? And can you make some recommendations of bands?
Sure, absolutely. So you'll get some debate in the community as about what constitutes math rock and whatnot. So I mean, you got bands like Don Caballero is probably like one of the originators. Bands like Hellas. Basically, what math rock is, it's generally like a 2-piece, 3-piece. It's usually like a couple guitarists and a drummer. Every so often there'll be a bass player, but it involves a lot of odd time signatures, and it's often the musicians are kind of playing different time signatures from one another almost. So, the drummer could be doing like a 5/4, and the guitarist is on like a 3/4, and it sounds really chaotic. But every once in a while, it's going to line up, and that's where it just brings the melody back. I explain it as jazz for kids who listen to like prog.
All
like
right.
You grew up listening to like Rush and Yes, but you were like, I want to get into jazz. But that's kind of what math rock is. There's a lot of great bands. My personal favorite math rock band is an outfit called Floral. It's 2 guys. This guy Nate Sherman, and I don't remember Tyler's last name. He's the drummer. But they put out this first EP when they were like teenagers, and it's beautiful. Like, it's melodic. It's the level of freneticism. Like, it's got hooks. They put out another one. It was just as good. And they recently, I think in 2020, put out their first LP, and it's a little bit of a departure, but like just enough of that flavor where they're great. Other bands like Standards. There's a band called Elephant Gym that's really good. They're out of, I believe, Taiwan. They have a bass player, and she is phenomenal. She's like Jaco Pastorius almost. Your bass player viewers will know who that guy is.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in a household with like the Beatles and Jethro Tull and Cat Stevens and that stuff. And I mean, I named my kid Harrison after one of the Beatles. His middle name's Elliot after Elliott Smith. So I like traditional, just pop rock and rock too. But there's something about math rock for me that aligns with the way my brain works, where it's just constantly firing thoughts. And that's what the music sounds like. There's like different, it's almost like there's multiple different themes going off in the same song at the same time. And every time you listen to it, there's something else you're hearing.
So I think, I hope I'm getting this right. The band that Kevin introduced me to on that day, I think it was Mute Math. Are you familiar with them?
I don't know that one.
Okay. I think they would fall, because some of the songs that I'm remembering kind of fall under the formula you're talking about just kind of different things happening at the same time and just kind of coming together. So I'm going to definitely check out some of the bands that you're
you get a lot of there's a lot of math rock crossover in like the Midwest emo drama genre. So like American Football, like a lot of people have like a math aspect too. Early 90s indie rock bands like P and Heavy Vegetable are very math rock influenced.
Okay.
I mean, it's a lot of bands that most people have never heard of, and bands that just they'll never get on the radio because you can't dance to it.
Yeah. All right. So I made a promise last week, during our promo, that we were going to try to stump each other on trivia.
Okay.
So I've got 3 questions for you, and I know you've got a couple questions for me. So I'm gonna defer to you. Would you like to throw out the first question, or would you like to receive the first question?
I will receive the first question.
Okay. And there's no prizes or anything. It's just for fun. We're going to be debuting a trivia show April 6th, which I believe is a Wednesday night. And the premise for the show is going to be, we're going to have a fan of one team against a fan of the other team, and whoever wins trivia that night is going to basically win a victory for your franchise in the Utopian. So if JC's on the show and he's representing the Brewers, and we have a Cubs fan, and JC wins, JC's going to pick an envelope, and the Brewers are going to get a win that night. So this is kind of a pilot, if you will.
So I'm going to preface this by saying you're likely going to stump me. For as much as I love baseball history and as informative as my videos can be, my brain is a sieve. So like certain things stay with me. Certain players are just in one ear out the other.
Sure.
I'll do my best.
All right. Well, and again, this is just for fun. This is an exhibition, if you will. The questions I got, I actually wasn't aware of one. One like probably would have came to me at some point. And the other, I probably would have been stumped and then be like, oh, I should have got that. But I'll give you the first question. Which pitcher has the most regular season wins in Major League history without a single Major League at bat?
Mark Melanson.
The correct answer is Ron Guidry with 170.
He never had an at bat.
He had 9 at bats in the postseason.
Oh, okay.
But nothing in the regular season, and I think he debuted maybe a year or two after the DH.
I know Melanson's got some kind of record where it's like the most. It might be the most plate appearances by a pitcher without an at bat. So he just kept walking or sacrificing or whatever the case was.
Oh, I see.
Ron Guidry. You asking me Yankee questions?
All right, you got one for me?
I do. This one's. I'll start off with a softball one. What pitcher holds the record for the most consecutive decisions being scored a loss?
I know this. The name is it Anthony Young?
Anthony Young.
Yeah. Like 27 straight or something?
It's like 19, he think 19. He lost. And
those Mets teams were horrible.
If you go through that streak,
yeah,
there's a lot of L's he took that he shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Like just came in relief, gave up a run, the Mets tied it up, and then all of a sudden he's hung with the loss. Like,
yeah, I remember like as good as the late 80s were for Mets fans, the early 90s were as bad.
I remember walking into Modell's early 90s and seeing a T-shirt, and it was like Bill Pulsifer, Jason Isringhausen, and whoever the third clown was. Like that was the future of the Mets.
Yeah.
And I just remember looking at it and being like, "Oh, good luck with that." Like,
yeah, didn't work out. Did not.
All
right. Second question I have. Who is the only member of the 600 home run club to not win an MVP?
Tommy?
Correct.
That's a quiet career.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you hit 600 home runs and nobody talks about you?
But again, like he played in an era where like you just had these monster seasons and he was just the consistent, all right, I hit 41 every year, you know.
That whole division is like that for the most part. Like somebody asked me the other day if I thought Paul Konerko was a Hall of Famer, and my instinct was no. And then I looked up the stats and I'm like, man, this guy's got way more home runs than I thought he did. Like, when did this happen?
Yeah. All right. What's your next question?
My brain just went blank on it. So who holds the record for the most plate appearances in a single season with the fewest strikeouts? And I'll tell you that he only struck out twice.
This is tough. This will be. You did a Tick Tock on this, didn't you, at some point?
So I did a Tick Tock on Joe Sewell. And so I'll give you the hint that it is not Joe Sewell. Joe Sewell only struck out 3 times, a couple of times in a season.
So the question is, who holds the record for most plate appearances with the least amount of strikeout? Or just phrase it again.
So who's got the fewest number of strikeouts with the highest number of plate appearances? So basically, subtract one from the other.
I mean, this is going to be a total guess. Sam Crawford.
Willie Keeler. He did it in 1899. I think he had 631, 33 plate appearances. Struck out twice.
It's incredible.
I just, and I'm hesitant to make a TikTok about that because you get a lot of the people with the recency bias, and they've got this like misunderstanding of human ability. And they're like, oh, the guys back then, they were all plumbers. They only threw like 60, 70 miles an hour. And it's like, no. It's just, no. You get all the people who think Babe Ruth couldn't play today, and it's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. My last question. Who is the only player to play for the first four expansion teams? There were 2 American League expansion teams in 61, 2 National League expansion teams in 62. He's the only player to play for those 4 and only those 4 teams.
So we're talking...
And I should rephrase that. Franchises. Because one of them has relocated.
Nolan Ryan?
Correct.
Nice.
Ryan started with the Mets. Then he went to the Angels, who were technically the first expansion team. Then he went to Houston, who came in 62 with the Mets, and then finished his career, obviously, with the Rangers, who were awarded a team in 61 when the Senators left for Minnesota. The following year, they got a new team that eventually became the Rangers. So you got 2 or 3. You got a final question for me? I think I'm 1 for 2, so I can tie you here.
Okay. The New York Yankees have retired the number 8 twice. Which 2 players?
Berra is 1, right?
Yogi Berra is one of them.
Bobby Richardson?
Bill Dickey.
Both catchers, too.
I get it, but at the same time, it just feels wrong to retire the same number twice.
Yeah. It's like, what's the point? It's like,
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, JC is going to join us again for some trivia this year at some point. JC, thank you for having a catch with me tonight.
I appreciate you having me.
The Tick Tock, again, is a brief history of baseball. We're going to throw that up, a link to that, so you guys can check him out. Just had a great time tonight talking baseball, talking music. Next week, we wrap up season 1 of Having a Catch. We're going to announce the guest here in the next couple of days. It's kind of a surprise. But JC, again, thanks for having a catch with me tonight, and I'm sure we'll see you on these airwaves soon.
I loved it, man. I appreciate you having me. And again, for everyone watching, look up Bobby Abreu. You're going to be surprised. Check him out. I'm going to post a link to his baseball reference page too, and you guys can decide on yourself. But again, thanks to JC. Check out A Brief History of Baseball on TikTok. And everyone have a good night, and we'll see you next week with the season finale.